Hello everyone and welcome back to Beatley Toes Beatles channel. Lovely to have you here. Thanks for joining me for this video. I hope you're all doing well. In today's video I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm not doing a Beatles video today. I want to talk about one of my favourite bands of all time, The Jam. And I did mention this a few weeks ago that I was going to be doing a video on The Jam, and that was, you know, it was greeted with a fair bit of enthusiasm, and I've kind of been putting it off because it's been very busy in the Beatles world. There's been a lot going on with the Beatles world, so that, you know, that takes priority. So this has kind of been pushed back, but I feel now is probably the right time to do it, because last week we lost Rick Buckler, the drummer in The Jam. He was 69 years old and died after a short illness. But I don't want to make this video like a tribute to Rick. I want to talk about The Jam as a whole. I don't really like doing tribute videos, the whole outpouring of lament sort of thing. It doesn't really suit me. But I want to talk about you know, The Jam as a whole. And The Jam were a three-piece band from Woking in Surrey, in the south of England, and they were huge in Britain in the late 70s and very early 80s, and then they broke up kind of when they were at their peak, and I'll come to that a little bit later. I kind of want to talk about you know, their short career. You know, they sort of, you know, appeared on the scene 1977. By 1982 they were done, and I'll talk about their career, my relationship with them, and you know, how and why they broke up in 1982. But as I say, they were huge in Britain, but they didn't really have much of an impact outside of the UK. It wasn't for the want of trying, but it just didn't really happen for them. And so they are a very British band, which would mean that, you know, a lot of people that tune into this channel are not from the UK. You may not or be familiar with their music, and so maybe after watching this video you may go and check them out and see whether you like them, because I think that you will, because The Jam were very influenced by 60s music. The Beatles, of course, were big heroes of them. Paul Weller, the guitarist and principal songwriter, you know, his big hero was Steve Marriott of the Small Faces. The Who were a big influence on The Jam, as were the Kinks and obviously the Beatles. And you know, there you will see, you know, if you do check out you know, the music of The Jam, you will find influence of all these bands in the Jam's music. There was nothing original about The Jam, I will say that, but they were a great band. So that's kind of what I'm going to be doing in this video, so let's get on with it. So let me set the scene. It's 1977 and I'm 16, and I'm about a year into my Beatles journey and absolutely loving it, but at the same time always being aware that the Beatles were from an earlier generation and I was catching up. And, you know, as a 16-year-old, you're aware that sort of, you know, every sort of generation of pop music, of you know, pop music fans have got their own bands, and I was a bit of a rebel without a clue and looking for something, and I was ripe for the picking. And in 1976, 1977, you know, punk rock arrived in the UK like a big explosion and kind of shook up the whole music scene that was getting very dull with pop, you know, prog rock songs, you know, going on for 20 minutes and all this sort of thing. And here were bands arriving, you know, that had, you know, 3-minute punchy songs that spoke to young people, that weren't about mythical beasts and you know, historical battles and all that sort of nonsense. And you know, I'm not going to pretend like for a single second that I was one of these sort of bondage trouser wearing, safety pin through the nose, snot tossing punk rockers, because that wasn't me. For a start, you know, punk conflicted me in some ways, because, you know, they were kind of, punk rock was kind of anti-Beatles and anti all that sort of stuff that had gone before, but on the other hand, you know, they did speak to young people, and that's what appealed to me. I got into the Sex Pistols and I got into the Clash, but on the back of punk, there was a whole plethora of bands that arrived on the scene that weren't really punk bands, but they arrived, you know, grabbing onto the coattails of punk, where they had, you know, punchy 2 and 3 minute songs that spoke to young people, that were about things that mattered to young people. And I'm talking about you know, bands like Elvis Costello and the Attractions, the Injury and the Blockheads, the Stranglers, Squeeze, all these bands, and the Jam were part of that. And I, you know, got to really love the Jam, who definitely weren't punk. You know, they wore suits for a start, and they were kind of ridiculed by the punk elite for wearing suits. The Clash alluded to the fact that they wore suits in their song Garageland from their debut album, but the Jam I really loved. And so who were the Jam? So the Jam were a 3-piece band, and whereas a lot of all these punk bands were from, you know, inner city towns and stuff like that, the Jam were from a leafy suburb in Surrey called Woking. Lead guitarist and principal songwriter Paul Weller, he played a Rickenbacker guitar just like John Lennon. Bruce Foxton, the bass player, who was the perfect foil for Weller's angsty angsty lyrics and splintery guitar shards, with his unrelenting but so melodic bass playing and amazing harmonies. He played a Rickenbacker bass just like Paul McCartney did in Magical Mystery Tour, and the drummer Rick Buckler played a Premier drum kit with huge tom-toms to get really deep sound. And Weller and Foxton, they played their guitars through Vox amps to try and get that authentic 60s sound. And they were bringing mod music, just like mod music had been given to rock fans in the 60s through bands like, the Kinks and the Small Faces and the Who. They were bringing mod music to the 70s generation, and I got fully on board. The first record that I bought by the Jam was their debut single called In the City, and In the City was a kind of a warning to the older generation that the kids needed to be listened to. It had lyrics like, "In the city there's 1,000 things I want to say to you, but every time I approach you, you make me look a fool." And it talked about the young idea, and the kids knew where it's at. And this wasn't particularly a new idea. This was more of a kind of an updated version of the times they are a-changing, that Bob Dylan had written maybe 13-14 years before, but it was played with thrashy guitar and angsty vocals, and I absolutely loved it. And I used to play it at full volume in my bedroom and bounce around my bedroom in my socks, much to the anguish of my parents, who would be watching TV in the room directly below my bedroom, and the stress caused to the light fitting in that room as I jumped off my bed onto the carpet as if I was jumping off a drum riser. But I absolutely loved it. In the City, the single, came from their debut album, also called In the City. This is my original copy from 1977. That is Paul Weller, that is Rick Buckler, the drummer, and that is Bruce Foxton, the bass player. And this album again was very exciting. It had some great tunes on it. Some of them played at breakneck speed, fantastic harmonies and thrashy guitars. Art School, I've Changed My Address. They even did a cover of Slow Down that the Beatles had done on the Long Tall Sally EP, but they played it at about 3 times the speed. Away From the Numbers became a modern day sort of mod anthem. And a song called Sounds from the Street, which was about you know, punk rock and new wave, you know, there was this theory that anyone, you know, anyone could be in a band. You could pick up a guitar and you could be in a band. You didn't have to be a superb musician to, you know, to write 3-chord pop songs, and you would walk down, you know, the street that you lived in, and there would be open bedroom windows, and you would be able to hear, you know, new bands rehearsing from bedrooms. And if it wasn't a street that you lived in, it was a street that you knew about and wouldn't want to live in for all the tea in Sainsbury's, but you kind of get the idea. But in the City, their debut album, very exciting album. It got great reviews, and it got to, I think, number 20 in the UK album charts, which was a great showing for you know, for a new band and a new genre, and great album. And Polydor, their label, you know, they didn't think that punk or new wave was going to last 12 months, and they wanted to cash in. And the Jam were kind of forced back into the studio, still in 1977, to produce their second album, which was called This Is the Modern World. And this album was a huge disappointment. It did contain one of their best singles, The Modern World, which is a great track, but it was clumsy and rushed, and it wasn't full of great tunes, and got absolutely panned by the critics. And this came as a huge shock to Paul Weller after the success of the first album. He had to go away and lick his wounds and have a rethink about where they were going to go with their next album. When it came to recording the band's third album, Weller's confidence as a songwriter was completely shot to pieces, and he had virtually nothing to bring to the table. And Bruce Foxton tried to help out by writing a few songs of his own, but when they got to the studio, the producer, Vic Coppersmith-Haven, he said these songs are just not good enough. They're not good enough. And he spoke to Paul Weller and he said, go away and write some better songs. And that's what he did. In November 1978, the Jam came back with what I consider to be their finest album, All Mod Cons. An absolutely brilliant album from start to finish. Not one bad song on this album. The album was preceded by a single, a cover of the Kinks' David Watts, coupled with a Jam original called A-Bomb in Wardour Street. This was a double A-sided single. Both tracks were on the album. There's a track on this album called To Be Someone, Didn't We Have a Nice Time? And it's about being a rock star and what happens when all your privileges are taken away, when you're no longer a famous rock star. But that bit didn't matter. It was all about the opening lyrics. To be someone must be a wonderful thing. A famous footballer or a rock singer or a big film star. Yes, I think I would like that. And that was the moment where I absolutely connected with Paul Weller, because that was exactly what I wanted to be, either a rock star or a footballer. If only I had the talent to go with the ambition. But that was the absolute moment. The album, as I say, was packed full of really good songs. Mr. Clean, about office type people, having a pop at them. And the album sleeve, there's a track missing between track 4 and track 5, because the track In the Crowd is actually track 6, and that track was called English Rose, which was a delicate acoustic ballad, an ode, patriotic song about England. And Paul Weller was almost too embarrassed to, was too embarrassed to put the title on the song. And also, and I'll show you the inner sleeve because it's great. But they also left the lyrics off of the lyric sheet here. That's a great inner sleeve, and actually full of sort of 60s artifacts. And I'll show you the record as well, because it's got this fantastic record label, the Mod Target, which I love. It's just a great record label. But the crowning glory of All Mod Cons, and as I say, there is not a bad track on this album. But the crowning glory of this album is the track, the very last track, called Down in a Tube Station at Midnight, which is about being mugged on the London Underground. And if anyone who ever travelled on the London Underground at night in the late 70s knew exactly what he was talking about. You recognised all the things that he talked about, like the glazed dirty steps and the British Rail poster that said "Have an away day." But the lyrics are just amazing. It's an amazing piece of storytelling about being, mugged and attacked in a tube station. I first felt a fist and then a kick. I could now smell their breath. They smelt of pubs and wormwood scrubs and too many right-wing meetings. And we knew exactly the type of people that he was talking about, even if we didn't know exactly what a right-wing meeting smelt like. The Underground is a much safer place these days and mainly just smells of Nando's. But that is how it was in the 70s. And the lyrics to this are almost frightening, because he's talking about, he's on his way home to his wife and he's got a takeaway curry and a bottle of wine, and they attack him and they take his keys. And it's frightening because you don't know how it gets revolved. Do they, take his keys and go to his house and attack his wife as well? You just don't know. But this song, musically as well as lyrically, is almost perfect. It's got, such a punchy bass line. It's so punchy it could knock you out cold. Played by Bruce Foxton, and Rick Buckler's frantic hi-hat playing on this song is quite incredible. It's a brilliant way to end a brilliant album, and All Mod Cons, as I say, I think is the Jam's finest hour or half hour. All Mod Cons got to number 6 in the charts, but by now I was fully on board with the whole mod thing. And one Saturday morning, me and a few mates, we went down to Carnaby Street and we all bought two-tone tonic suits and hush puppies. I had to wear a suit for work anyway, so I, why not wear a clobber that gave me an identity? It was almost like going to work in fancy dress, if you like. But I wasn't the only person in my place of work that had, joined this sort of, got on board with the whole mod thing. And on the 21st of December 1978, I saw the Jam live for the first time at a venue called the Music Machine, which was an all-standing venue in Camden Town, and there were a few bands on that night, and the Jam came on at about midnight and played a set that was only just over an hour, about 17 songs, but still long enough to make us miss our tube home and have to get the night bus. But they were fantastic, and being a three-piece band, playing live is a tough gig. You've got to be as tight as a gnat's chuff to pull it off as a three-piece, because when a lead guitarist takes a solo, then you need the bass to fill in that gap that maybe a second guitar would normally fill. And the band, including Rick Buckler's drumming, which was also really, really tight, were just totally on top of that. And about a year later, November 1979, the band released their fourth album, Setting Suns. Not quite as good as All Mod Cons, but still an album full of really great songs. This was originally going to be a concept album about three school friends and how they go through life. There's about 3 songs on the album that kind of allude to that theory: Thick as Thieves, Little Boy Soldiers, and Burning Sky. There's also a really great track called Private Hell, which talks about how parents feel when their children sort of abandon them. How well I knew about this sort of thing at such a young age is incredible. But the lyrics go, think of Emma, wonder what she's doing, her husband Terry, and your grandchildren. Think of Edward, still at college. You send him letters that he doesn't acknowledge because he doesn't care, and things like that. But the album was preceded by a single called The Eton Rifles, which for me has got the best opening verse of any pop song ever written. Just love it. It went sup up your beer and collect your fags. There's a row going on down near Slough. By fags, he's talking about cigarettes, the English meaning of the word fags, and it's talking about a battle with the military arm of Eton School, the public school in Britain. It's a great, really aggressive track, and Setting Suns did better than All My Cons in the charts, got to number 4, and the Jam also had this great idea about releasing standalone singles, just like their sort of heroes did in the 60s. Strange Town, that came sort of in between All Mod Cons and Setting Suns, and had a great B-side called The Butterfly Collector. When You're Young was another great standalone single, and following Setting Suns, the Jam released this single, Going Underground, a double A side with a track called Dreams of Children on the back. And this, no messing, this entered the UK singles chart at number 1, and the Jam had really arrived as a tour de force. The other side, Dreams of Children, was straight out of the Revolver, a book of writing psychedelic pop with its sort of backmask guitar and that sort of thing. But the Jam were now really the number 1 singles band in the UK. I saw the Jam for the second time on the 3rd of November 1979, just after Setting Suns came out. And I've got this single, and I've no idea where it came from. It's got, it just comes in a plain white sleeve, which my cat has eaten or ate at the time, as he tended to do, the record sleeve. And this single, I've no idea where it came from. It's not listed as a Jam single. It's an official single. It's on the Polydor label, and it was recorded that night that I saw the Jam at the Rainbow. It's got Away From the Numbers and The Modern World on the A side, and Down in the Tube Station at Midnight on the B side, all live versions recorded that night. And I don't know whether this is a single, because sometimes when you used to go to gigs around this time, as you went through the door, you used to get handed a free single, and I don't know whether this came from that or whether it was a free single included in one of the albums. I can't remember. It's not listed as an official Jam single anyway, and this is a French pressing, so I've no idea where it came from, but it's an interesting addition to my collection. November 1980 saw the release of the Jam's 5th album, Sound Effects. Paul Weller described this as being the Jam's best album. I disagree. He also described it as being a cross between Revolver, which you can definitely see, and Michael Jackson's Off the Wall, which I can't personally see. But for me, this is the start of the Jam being just slightly past their best. This is still a good album, but it has got some filler on it, and it's not as good as All Mod Cons or Setting Suns. For me, there is a little bit of filler on it. I'm thinking about songs like Scrape Away and Music for the Last Couple, and a couple of songs that are okay. They're not quite filler, but they're not quite top tier Jam songs either. I'm thinking about Set the House Ablaze and Dreamtime, but there is plenty to enjoy on Sound Effects. The opening track, Pretty Green, has got a great bass line, and the track Monday, very dreamy, very psychedelic, very sort of Revolver Sergeant peppery. There's a couple of mod anthems, but I'm Different Now and Boy About Town, and great track called Man in the Corner Shop that Paul Weller still occasionally plays live these days as a solo artist. But the opening single from this album, called Start, has got an identical bass riff to George Harrison's Taxman from the Revolver album, and quite how they got away with that, I'm not quite sure. Another single from the album, That's Entertainment, wasn't even released in the UK, but it was released in other territories, and it got into the UK charts via the import market. People bought import copies, and it still got to number 21. And That's Entertainment became sort of a jam classic, an acoustic song where Weller gives you, a snapshot of how depressing the UK was in 1980. A smash of glass and a rumble of boots, electric trains and a ripped up phone booth, paint splattered walls, the cry of a tomcat, lights going out and a kick in the balls. And then in another verse, waking up at 6 a.m. on a cool warm morning, opening the window, breathing in petrol, an amateur band rehearsing in a nearby yard, watching the telly and thinking about your holidays. That was a snapshot of Britain for young people in 1980. Sound Effects, a good album, not a brilliant album, but still a good album. Despite some of its misgivings, Sound Effects still became the Jam's highest placed album to date, reaching number 2 in the UK album charts. But 1981 was a very quiet year for the Jam. No album this year for the first time since 1977. They did release 2 standalone singles, Funeral Pyre, which is probably best known for its frantic drumming by Rick Buckler, probably his greatest moment within the Jam on that song, and another song called Absolute Beginners. Both singles reached number 4 in the charts. But in March 1982, we got the final Jam album, The Gift, and as I say, I do believe that by the time we got to this album, we were really in a state of diminishing returns. I think from All Mod Cons back to The Gift, each album is slightly not as good as the one before. And, the Gift, I felt, had, quite a lot of filler on it. The Planner's Dream Goes Wrong, Circus, Trans-Global Express. It did have some great moments on it. Happy Together and Ghosts are great tracks. Precious is, shows Weller's leaning towards dance music, which would serve him well throughout the 80s. Was a number 1 single with A Town Called Malice, which was a kind of a Motown thing. Became a Jam classic, and again a track that Weller still plays live now. There is a really interesting track on this called Carnation, which I think is a fantastic track. But the best version of this song is not by the Jam. If you want to hear the best version of the song Carnation, which, like I say, is a fantastic song, go to a compilation album called Fire and Skill, which is was made in the late 90s with lots of artists of the day doing covers of Jam songs, and Carnation was covered by Liam Gallagher with Steve Craddock from Ocean Colour Scene on guitar. And Steve Craddock has been with Paul Weller as a solo artist pretty much right from the get-go. When he started his solo career, he plays with him live still, and has played on almost every one of Paul Weller's solo albums. But their version of Carnation on the album Fire and Skill is far and away the best version of this song. Now, halfway through the recording of The Gift, Paul Weller told Rick and Bruce that he wanted to finish the band. The 3-piece format was not enough for him anymore. He wanted to explore other avenues, playing in bigger bands with bigger instrumentation and stuff like that. And he went off and formed the Style Council, which I quite liked, but a lot of Jam fans completely ignored what he done after the Jam, and weren't interested at all. He gave the excuse, apart from the fact that he wanted to explore, different types of music that a three-piece format just couldn't deliver. He said that he wanted to break up the band when they were at their peak so that they actually meant something in the future, which to me was a little bit of an excuse, because I don't believe that they were at their peak. I think they were past their peak. But The Gift was their last album, but they weren't done. They weren't done yet. They had a couple more standalone singles. The Bitterest Pill I Ever Had to Swallow was a fantastic song, standalone single, and their very final single, Beat Surrender, was a good single as well. Also went straight to #1. The Jam did a farewell tour in the UK, and on the 11th of December 1982 they played their last gig at the Brighton Conference Centre, and that was it. So if you're not familiar with the music of the Jam and you're interested in exploring the music of the Jam, which I hope you are, some recommendations as far as their albums go. I would start with All Mod Cons and Setting Suns, those two being their best albums. But I would also recommend this compilation called Snap, which is a double album which contains every A-side of the singles, plus a few B-sides and some key album tracks. Really good compilation. If you're lucky enough to find one, you might find one that's got this free live EP tucked inside it, but as I say, you'll be lucky if you find one with the EP in it these days, but you never know your luck. It is a fantastic compilation and definitely worth seeking out. So those would be my recommendations if you are looking to get yourself into the Jam. That's pretty much it from me. Thanks very much for watching. If you are a Jam fan, tell me about it down in the comments. Tell me your favourite stuff and all that sort of stuff, or if you're now considering exploring the music of the Jam, having seen this video, tell me that as well. Okay, that is it from me. We'll be back to the Beatles stuff again in the next video. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye bye.